Welcome in, everybody, to the Modern Missionary Podcast, sponsored by Odeon Menswear. My name is Braden Day. I'm the CEO of Odeon and the host of this podcast. I'm here with my co-host for the day, Juan Jimenez. He is actually from my home ward, so I'm really, really excited to have him on. We knew each other. He's a couple years older than me, but I kind of followed him throughout some of the young men's and watched him go out on a mission. He was inspiring to me, so really excited to have him on. And we're going to just jump into it. Juan, I would just love to ask you some questions, maybe some background, what your name is, where you're from, where you served your mission, and then maybe one of your favorite hobbies.
Yeah. I grew up, well, let's start from the very beginning. I was born in California, and then I moved to Utah when I was about 7 years old. And then that's where I met one of my really great friends, Austin. And from there, we've been together, done everything together. In fact, he not to get racist in here or anything, but he's as white as he can be, and I'm a brown kid, and for some odd reason, they always get the two of us really mixed up.
That is weird.
So I raised a lot in Fillmore. Fillmore, I consider my home roots, and so learned a lot, done a lot, seen a lot, as much as you can in a small town. And somehow I ended up here at Logan, Utah, and I've stayed here ever since. So it's been a very, very, very interesting journey that I've had. So I guess a little bit more background about myself. I was not born in the covenant or as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I actually started out in Catholicism, so Catholic. And then with time, my friends shared the gospel with me, and we can dive further into those details if that's something you want, Braden.
Yeah, I'd love for you to kind of talk about that. That's also great. Let's go right into it.
Fill in the missing gaps that you've never had.
Yeah, remind me. Yeah, just go into how old, because I feel like I'm kind of now remembering you starting to come to church, and I don't know if I was at your baptism or anything like that, but I do kind of remember some of the things.
I think you might have been at my baptism because your dad was in the bishopric, and so I imagine he dragged you along.
Yeah.
And so, so let's go over how I actually received the gospel in its fullness.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I joined the Scouts when I was 12, around there. I even joined the Cub Scouts, so it's even earlier. And through my friends, they're always telling me that I'm always missing out on all the details of the activities that we're going to be doing, because every time I showed up, I just have no idea what we're doing. And so they eventually started to annoy me and invite me to church. And it wasn't really until probably when I was about 14, when my brother's friends, so if you remember Cody Barnhurst, Justin Wall, that group, they invited my brother to go to church with them, and he accepted that invitation. And that always took a place in my heart. I'm like, okay, well, he did that. Well, that was interesting. And then he also made it so his friends go to the Catholic Church. And so it was very, it was a deal, you know. And so I've always remembered that in back of my mind. And then when I was about 15, during the summer, going through a very, very hard time in my life. Parents essentially got divorced. My dad committed a crime, and he ended up going to jail. And then from there, I was just very, very angry. And the way that I see things is that my friends saw how much of that affected my life, and they started to invite me to church more aggressively. And remembering that thought of my brother did accept and made that deal, I also made that deal with my friends. In fact, it was the entire teachers' quorum that went in, including our advisors. So if you remember Doug Nielsen, he was also part of the deal. And
That is
so,
awesome. That's awesome. And I can see him going. And honestly, just a little interjection here. I think it's awesome. I think it's awesome when we're sharing the gospel, both obviously from our church, but any other places, being willing to if you're going to ask somebody else to do something, being willing to do it yourself. And so I think it's awesome
yeah,
that they did that and they were willing to look at that. So sorry, quick interjection on there, but that was yeah. I think it's awesome that they were willing to do that. Both your brother's friends and your friends, and Bishop Nielsen there. So
yeah. So it was pretty awesome. And then so I attended, and then they attended my church, and then they just kept inviting me, and it got to the point where I was like waiting for them to invite me to go, and then there was this one day where they didn't invite me, and I'm like, oh, this feels a little weird. And then after that, I just started going. And I started doing all the activities even more. So, I mean, back then it was still the 3-hour church. So you had sacrament, Sunday school, and then teachers/priests. And then towards my junior year in high school, still being 15-year-old, one of the days that I attended church, I met the missionaries. So we did a quick introduction to see if I was interested in learning. And being a nice kid, I mean, I'm like, yeah, sure, yeah, I'll listen. I mean, I'm not gonna do anything about it, but yeah, I'll listen. And if we were gonna do this, I didn't want my mom to find out. So we actually kind of met in secret. Pretty sure my mom already knew. I mean, it's a small town; everyone talks.
yeah,
So.
yeah,
And then with time, started getting into the lessons, started learning a lot more about the gospel, started reading about the Book of Mormon. In fact, one of my good friends, Josh Camp, actually wrote his testimony in a Book of Mormon and gave me that copy. And I have that copy to this day, and it's a really, really great reminder for me. And that's what sparked my seriousness in investigating the church. And so because of that, he wrote in his testimony that I know that this is the true church. And I'm like, you can't know things. It's always like, there's no knowledge. It's just by faith, And so I took that challenge very, very seriously. Because again, you don't know things.
yeah.
And then started learning more of the gospel. It got to the point where the missionaries kind of had no idea what to do with me.
Just because you were progressing, but maybe couldn't commit, or what was that kind of?
Yeah. So like they couldn't get me to commit to baptism. I learned everything that I could at that time, and the one thing that really, it's actually quite interesting because this morning I shared a verse that got me to really, really evaluate baptism. And I shared that to my son, who's 7 years old, and he was asking why I was baptized when I got older. So I actually shared that experience with him. So I'll share the same scripture that struck me to the core. It's in Mosiah chapter 18, verses 8 through 10, where the waters of Mormon come in and everything. And so with the missionaries, I can still remember the missionaries, Elder Ursua and Elder Sereno. And so Elder Ursua, he asked the questions just as if Alma was asking the group of people that had that desire to be baptized. And so he started asking, do you have the desire to follow Jesus? Like, well, yeah, I do. Do you have the desire to comfort one another? Well, yeah. Are you willing to bear another person's burdens so that they could be light? Like, well, yeah, obviously. And then are you willing to be a witness of Christ? Like, well, yeah, sure, yes. And then the core question is, well, if you have these desires, like what's preventing you from being baptized? And it just blown me away because I'm like, that's a really good question. I don't know what's preventing me from being baptized. So I started to do more soul searching. And I was so blessed with the friends that I had. because without them, I wouldn't have been guided to seeking the right answers. And to make that journey a little bit shorter, nothing was preventing me from being baptized. It was just a matter of choice. And one of my really good friends, Katie, she said something that like allowed me to make the decision. And because I asked her like, help me figure this out and everything, and she mentioned to me that, hey, look, even if you choose not to be baptized, we're still going to be your friends. Like, it doesn't matter the choice that you make. We're still going to be here for you. And because in the back of my mind, I was sometimes thinking like, oh, maybe they're just trying to, join me in their church so we can stay friends. Maybe, and I didn't want to disappoint my friends.
Yeah.
A hard time with disappointment. And so, knowing that information, the next time I talked with missionaries, they asked me, will you be baptized? The words came out saying yes without me even thinking. It just like, yes. And then when I committed to that, I'm like, oh, whoa, I just committed to a baptism. Crap. And I still was trying to take that Book of Mormon challenge very seriously from my friend Josh. So we scheduled a baptismal date, and then I remember very, very clearly that an hour before my baptism, I finished the Book of Mormon. And I remember putting my hand right on top of the Book of Mormon, and I said a prayer to Heavenly Father of, I don't want to be baptized unless I know this is true. And I started to recognize some of the feelings of the Spirit, and I felt it was very small. It wasn't like this powerful, like, yes, this is the true gospel. No, it was actually very quiet. But I was looking and listening to that feeling, and it's just that calm feeling of, it's true. And so I got my answer. And from then on out, like an hour later, my good friend Austin was able to baptize me. And then his dad confirmed me as a member of the church. And then a week later, at this time frame, I turned 16. A week later, my other good friend Carson ordained me as a priest. And so, like, since then, I've never forgotten that, and I've always shared that testimony with everyone. And something that always, for those that do doubt, when we say that we know, it's because we actually do know. And if you're wanting to know, start asking.
Yeah.
And so it's basically been my journey in being a member of the church. And then from there, I basically hardly ever missed a day of church. And no, it was a very, very great experience. And then later on, obviously, I made the decision to serve a mission. And
so what was that like? Like, what was, because you are a convert, because you joined, I mean, you didn't, not a convert at 11, you were a convert at 16. Like, this was right at this age where, like, there's a lot of things going on. It's only a couple years old by the time you're starting to think of going on a mission. It's like, what was that like? Because obviously, I one thing interjection with kind of what you were talking about before, but also leads into this, is you really did have amazing friends. Like, when I think of that friend group that were in that, I mean, all the ones you mentioned were in our ward. Like that fourth ward group was amazing, and those kids were so diligent, and not just like you said, like Katie mentioned, like, it wasn't something that they weren't going to abandon you if you didn't choose it, but they really wanted you to do it. They really, really saw the value. And so they were still examples on going on missions. And I'm sure that affected some of that decision with the mission was some of that thing. And kind of looking at it from my side, I remember you joining, but I just wasn't old enough maybe to make it click or anything. But like, there was so much behind your story that I hadn't ever thought of or even kind of looked at that kind of got to that point. So I'm really intrigued to kind of see what that decision to go on a mission looked like for you.
Yeah, no, it was actually very easy to make. I mean, it's once you receive a testimony, it's so hard not to share that. And
Yeah.
so, when I went to college, I went up here to Utah State for about a year. I was very very young. I was 17 when I went to college, and I had to wait because the age hadn't changed at that point. So I had to wait until I was 19 to serve. So it was really hard for me seeing my friends go serve. And Austin being the oldest, he was the first one to leave, and then a few months later, Carson was then able to leave, and then basically everyone was going one by one, and I was the last person to go on a mission. And so that waiting period of receiving my call up until I actually left, that was really that was actually quite hard. And the reason why it was so hard because I got into that mindset of I being very very prideful here. I know when I testify, I know I'm speaking truth. And so when I share the gospel with my friends, I got to the point where I was thinking maybe they're joining the gospel because of me. So I have to be here and stay here for them. And
Yeah.
so submitting my papers and all that, I mean, that part was easy. It was just going through the motions, but like the time frame of leading up to actually leaving, that was getting more and more difficult because it felt like I needed to stay, but that feeling was more of like a paranoia feeling. That wasn't a feeling that was coming from God, essentially.
And really quick question on that. So when you talk about the people that you were worried about leaving, and was it family? Was it friends? What was it? What did that look like?
Yeah, it was a mixture of family and some friends that I made while I went to college. And so
Okay.
a year after I was baptized, I baptized my sister Naomi. And so at that time, it was just me and Naomi who were active in the church, who were participating very heavily in the church, and who are the only members of the church at that time. And then, so I felt like if I left, I was going to lose that. But I know my sister was also at that point very strong in the gospel. Because like once you're gained that testimony, it's like you're on fire, and everyone can feel that.
Yep.
But so I felt like if I have left, that was going to crumble.
Yeah.
And so when I entered into the MTC, I still carried that feeling. And that feeling really didn't go away. It wasn't until and I was sending lots of, at that point we could send emails, and I was trying to write letters as well, telling my friends like, hey, keep staying strong in the gospel. And with one of my friends, I shared like all my struggles and everything. And I was really, I hated the phrase from Gordon B. Hinckley's of forget yourself and go to work. I never understood that. I never understood like how do you forget yourself and just go to work? It just does not make sense.
Yeah.
And so I was still very very worried. And when one of my friends had told me that, I'm like, well, this isn't gonna help me out at all. And then I was talking to one of the teachers that was in the Spanish. And so, yeah, we'll get to my Spanish language here in a second. So I was called to serve in Argentina, Buenos Aires West Mission. And so they put me into to more of the advanced course. And with that advanced course, I had really two amazing teachers. And one of the brothers, he kind of felt like he was experiencing what he experienced in the past was very similar to what I was experiencing. And he told me to just like, hey, just start focusing on these things. The Lord's going to bless everyone else. Okay? You work hard. The harder you work, the more blessings the other people receive. The people that you actually care about. And so I'm like, okay, all right, okay, I'll just focus on this, focus on learning how to teach, and then I'll figure it out later. And so I kind of slowly stopped writing to people to the point where even my mom didn't receive letters from me, which is really, really so I do want to circle back into my Spanish because in California they had Spanish schools, and so I grew up in California up until I was 7, knowing and learning the Spanish language. But when I
And
came
remind us
to
what your heritage is.
my parents are from Mexico. My mom's from Michoacan, and my dad is from Ensenada.
Yeah,
And so I was born in California, learned the Spanish language, and my dad's very, very has a very thick Mexican accent. And my mom, yeah, she also has a Mexican accent, but when she's speaking in English, like you can actually understand my mom versus my dad. Like you couldn't
yeah,
understand my dad at all.
yeah,
So when we moved to Fillmore, Utah, there were hardly any Latinos there.
yeah,
And seeing that my parents didn't really know anyone and they had to learn English, we talked a lot of English at home. So us kids, so me and my siblings, we learned more of the English language to the point that as we got older, we were starting to forget Spanish.
yeah.
And so right
And
before I
one
went to the
quick question on that, because I know a lot of because although the Latino community is obviously by far the minority in Fillmore, there was quite a few families, different families that were there, and I know with some of them, like at home, they would hear Spanish, the parents would talk to them in Spanish, but then they would talk back in English. How was it what was that dynamic look like in your family?
it
Were
was
both
actually
sides
quite
talking
similar.
English? Okay,
No, it was quite similar because, yeah, we as we were getting older, we were talking back more in English rather than Spanish. And then as we started hitting our teenage years, my dad started getting mad at us for speaking back in English, and so he wouldn't do anything until we started speaking back in Spanish. In fact, I remember this one time where I was trying to get to the walls to their place, and I had to tell my dad how to get there in Spanish, and I couldn't remember how to say left, right, straight, and so I'm like, I was in tears trying to figure it out, and like it got to that point, and you know, and my dad was doing the right thing of making sure I didn't forget Spanish.
yeah,
But I got to the point where I could understand Spanish, but I couldn't talk back,
yeah,
and so it was very unfortunate that I didn't develop that skill or that language. So when I got to the MTC, they were evaluating my Spanish. Well, before I got there, they gave me a call to see where my Spanish levels was, and honestly, they asked the basic questions like every if you took a Spanish course in high school, you're gonna know the
yeah,
typical questions. And so those were like, oh, that's easy. I can answer that. That's easy, you know. Uh, but when I got to the advanced course, like I couldn't understand. I couldn't keep up. I was like, and everyone else they were all Latinos. Some of them were from out of the states, and most of them basically grew up in Utah or in California. Had a really really good district. They were so awesome. And they noticed how much I was struggling, and so they were all just trying to help me find the right words. And towards the end of the MTC, I finally like was able to have some type of conversation with my companions, and so that was an interesting experience of trying to relearn the language, and then heading to Argentina where the language is not the same.
yeah. Well, and one thing that I noticed with some, because I had quite a few elders in my mission and even in my district when we were going out, or close that had some knowledge of Spanish already, whether it was because they were born into a family that way, they took a lot of classes, dual immersion. Um, the ones that had learned it at the home but had not studied it in school, I feel like almost being in an advanced class almost hurt them because they didn't get to learn the actual proper grammar. They knew they could communicate with the words, but the grammar was there. So even by the end of the mission, like I had people like I would be with a companion. They're like, the members were like, "Oh, well, you speak better than he does," and I'm like, "He's spoken it his whole life," but it was just because they didn't understand the full grammar. Because the ones that live in Mexico and grow up in Mexico, I served in Mexico, so that's why I'm using Mexico. Those people learned it all throughout school. They learned the rules. And in English, when you live in the States, you're learning all the rules. But when you speak Spanish in the States and you don't take classes, you don't know the rules. And so there's lots
That's
of
true.
grammatical issues that come up there where they could totally understand every single word that was being said, and they could speak back in a way that would be understandable but not actual grammatically correct. And so there was always, I'm sure that you probably dealt with some of that where it took a while to either you didn't get it, or I'm sure you did, but it took a lot longer because you didn't get to start from a base. They just kind of threw you in the deep end and said, go learn it.
Well, I mean, yes, that's absolutely correct. Even to today, I wasn't really taught very great Spanish grammar as well as English grammar. So, like, sometimes when I am talking, I kind of revert back into my Spanish way of communicating.
Yeah.
And then sometimes when I'm talking in Spanish, I revert into like English way, grammar wise. And so it's just the critical years where I was learning to develop how to speak correctly, grammatically correctly, I missed out on. So
Yeah.
when my son is learning like the phonetic alphabet and everything for the English language, I have no idea what that language. I mean, I saw his homework and everything, and I'm like, how do you pronounce these words?
Yeah.
And Elise, like my wife, she looks at it. It's like, oh yeah, you just like it's baboon. It's like, how is that baboon? And so
Yeah.
like I never learned that at all, and to this day I still have no idea how to say those
Yeah.
words correctly. So I've actually had to memorize every English word that I've heard, and I can't. The way that I communicate, I have to mentally see the words, even in the English language. If I can't mentally see the words, I don't know how to pronounce it, nor do I know how to use the word. And so,
And that's interesting because I do that same thing for Spanish. I know that that's how I think it's Spanish. Like in my mind, I'm actually writing it on a page, but you're
yeah,
not seeing it. In English, I
yep.
don't do that. In English, it just goes. So
Oh,
it's
that's
interesting that you have both of those, where because of you learned it in weird ways, in timing wise, you
yep,
have it in both. So that's really interesting, and I'm sure it was a challenge on the mission, is figuring that out and learning how to communicate that way through kind of having both, neither fully but both a lot type of
yep.
situation with the language.
Yes, it was. Yeah, it's very very interesting how my brain has developed when it comes to communicating. And so
Yeah,
even when serving in Argentina, the first couple months, yeah, the Spanish language was a little bit more difficult. It felt like they were talking faster, but in reality, they actually weren't. It was basically the same speed. It's just that they have a different dialect, and so it's like if you're speaking to an Australian with their native tongue,
yeah,
where like you have no idea what they're saying, you think they're talking really fast. Well, in reality, they're just using what's the word, slang.
yeah. It's slang in different accents. Yep. Well, and I even noticed that on my mission with Argentines coming, or obviously Argentina, Spain, and then the Mexican Spanish are kind of the three big ones. Obviously, you get every country has their own little slang and dialect, but there's the normal Spanish, Argentine Spanish, and Spain Spanish, as the way I call it. Obviously, I'm saying normal because that's the one that I know now. But like, it was interesting to see that words in one country mean a completely different thing in another country, and I won't go into specifics because I don't want to go into vulgar topics here. But there were words that just blew missionaries away when we would say them in Mexico, because in Argentina they meant a completely different thing, and not a great thing. And so there was all those different things. So as you that are listening or following, there's going to be, even if you're going to a certain country speaking a language that either you know or don't know, there are going to be people coming that speak the same language, but it's not the same language, and you got to be patient with them. If you're training somebody who's coming from Argentina, but you're in Mexico, be patient with them. There is some differences there. So I just kind of wanted to interject that, because it's definitely, even though you knew you could understand Mexican Spanish because you grew up that your whole life that way. You didn't actually understand Argentine Spanish.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a very, very great example that I've always talked with missionary companions that I had, is that with English, American English and British English, the word bloody, yeah, it doesn't mean anything here in the U.S., but in Britain, it's a swear word. It's like the
Yeah.
equivalent of the F word, but the F word over there is like it's nothing. It means nothing
Yep.
to them. It's not a
Yep.
curse word. So it's just things like that. But yeah, so yeah, learning the Argentine language, that was fun. That was a lot of fun. It wasn't until I left my first area where I felt like I can actually have a conversation, and that was probably closer to the 5th month mark.
It's something that I want missionaries to know, is that it's going to be tough with the language, whether it's Spanish, whether it's anything. But you understood Spanish your whole life, basically. You went to the MTC and you were there for 4 months, and still you didn't feel extremely comfortable until the 5 month mark. Like, don't expect yourself to be getting there and all of a sudden speak it. Be okay with the fact that it's not going to be as easy as you hope it is. Because I got down there, I was depressed because all my only purpose was to be my companion's companion. Like, I couldn't do anything. I could give a memorized testimony because I had memorized it, and I believed what I was saying, and I really do feel like it was effective. But that's literally was the extent of my purpose. I felt like my companion do that. I didn't know what they were talking about, and so yeah, be okay with the fact that it's going to be a little slower sometimes. So
Yeah, yeah, no, I completely agree with you on that one. And the interesting part is I didn't have trying to use your words there. I actually didn't have like a memorized testimony, and so because I always just base it on whatever I'm feeling at the moment. And the one time where probably my 2nd month in Argentina, we were doing splits with with the zone leader. My companion was my trainer. He was the district leader, so he did a lot of splits with other missionaries, exchanges, excuse me. And so I was with the zone leader and then teaching this lady, and he did most of the lesson, and then he just turned to me and be like, basically, bear your testimony of this, and I just started just trying to speak with whatever words that I knew I had, and even making up my own words. And so I testified of the gospel. Obviously, my words were lacking a lot there. And however, the feeling was strongly present to the point where I saw her expression change, and she grabbed the Book of Mormon from my hand and took the challenge of reading it very, very seriously from then on out. And then when I went back another month later, she ended up actually getting baptized and everything, and she was excited to see me. And I'm like, oh, I don't remember you, but okay. But like, even if you don't know the language, even if you have a snippet of your testimony that you did memorize, the thing that's really, really, really important is that as long as you're testifying with truth, that's when you can bring the Spirit in. And the whole point, in my opinion, is creating an environment where the Spirit can testify to the individual that you're teaching that the gospel is true. So it's your job. It was our job to create that environment. And the only way to really create those environments is if you yourself have that testimony. And so I'm just very, very grateful that when I did serve down in Argentina, that my friends really helped open up my eyes, as well as creating an environment where the Spirit can be present. And so I don't base off my testimony off of anyone else's examples or by their actions or any of that. I base my testimony off of what the Lord has shared with me.
I love that, and I think something that maybe the way I said it came across wrong. I just want to make sure that's clear. you may feel worthless, but there is worth there. And I actually think the experience you shared is so true. It almost, you can feel the Spirit more when you can understand what the other person is saying than when you can't, because you get distracted by the words. But when you don't understand it, then you feel it more. And so I do think that's something that happens, and that's a good insight from what you're talking about.
To expand even more on that, there are time frames when later in the mission you're just like fully confident that you sometimes stop relying on faith. And so you're sometimes we get that confusion of the words that we're trying to say or the words that they are trying to say, and work off of that rather than having the faith of relying on those spiritual promptings. Because very, very early on, I can recall that I was relying so much, like every decision that I made, like I was wanting to make sure it was based off of what the Lord wanted me to do. And obviously with time that's going to change, because the Lord's trying to teach you while you're in your mission. And so the thing that I clearly remember is that I was everything, even going where I needed to go. I just like, okay, is this the right choice? Okay, good. I'm still feeling the Spirit. I think I'm feeling the Spirit. And then later on, you get to the point where when you start making plans, you're going through your day and everything, and then something else pops up in your minds, like, hey, no, actually go do this instead. So you're kind of getting into that rhythm of like not necessarily relying so much on the Spirit. It's not what I'm trying to say. It's just it's different. You just have the confidence of like, hey, I know what I'm doing, and I know the Lord's going to help me change the plans according to what He wants me to do. And so at first it's like, Lord, present me the plan. And then later on it's like, Lord, here's the plan that I'm presenting. Tell me what I need to change.
I think that's a huge thing that I learned throughout the same process is it requires a lot more of us. We're here to be agents, but that doesn't mean we don't need to rely on the Spirit still. We just need to rely on the Spirit through being agents instead of being puppets, I guess is a better way to say it. So, okay, let's jump into another question here. I would love to hear, let's first go on your favorite thing about your mission, like the best thing about it, and then the hardest thing about it.
It's the same topic for me.
Okay.
Here's why it's the same. I've always been fascinated by the feelings of the Spirit. I've always been fascinated by it because there is no other feeling that can recreate what the Spirit can do. And so I've always struggled mentally as well as emotionally, probably is the best way to describe it, of discerning, when do I actually feel the Spirit? When is it present? And I've read so many scriptures, so many verses, so many materials about the Spirit that my first year in the mission field, I was very, very frustrated that I couldn't figure it out. And so that first year, I was very, very discouraged because I couldn't figure out. I was struggling so much in understanding the feelings of the Spirit. And it really wasn't until I would there was a specific day where I told the Lord, okay, enough is enough. I can't figure this out. Please teach me on how to feel you, on how to feel the feelings of the Spirit. I want to know how you communicate with me. And that day was the best day for me because He taught me how to communicate with me and all the different variables that go with it. And so since that day, I base everything off of what I've been taught. And here's how it happened. After that prayer, He started with a very, very strong feeling. A feeling to where I know this is the Spirit. So He started with that basis point. And then with time, He started to fluctuate. He even got to the point of, this is how I feel. This is how you should feel when I am not present. And when He wasn't present, I was struggling so much in communicating with people and trying to figure out, like, what am I supposed to say? What am I supposed to teach you? Like even if I did have a lesson plan, and I know exactly what I was going to teach, I couldn't teach correctly. And so, and then he got to the point where towards the end of the day, he taught me in my opinion, what the whisperings of the Spirit feels like. And so for me, that prior to that day, it was a living nightmare because I wanted to teach by the Spirit and I didn't know how. And I thought I did. After that day, I wouldn't say that I was a master at it. It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I had a really big tool on my belt that I know when the Lord was speaking with me and how I was able to change my course, the way that I taught, the way that I communicate with people, and using the right words. It really wasn't until my 18th month mark in the mission field where I got transferred back into the main city, where we were doing role playing, and I hated role playing. I absolutely hated role playing. But I got to the point where I actually took role playing very seriously because I didn't realize the powerful lessons that can come from it. We were doing in our district meeting, there was a role playing that we were trying to figure out and help the sister missionaries understand, like, hey, how you can help this person overcome their fears or overcome whatever trial they had. And so you had our sisters and a set of elders, and they were doing this role playing and everything. And I just had that feeling of like, they're not trying their best. They're just going through the motions. We're not really helping this person out. And then once they got done, I'm like, I asked permission, like, hey, can we do this again? But let me come in this time. Let me be the investigator. Let me try to figure out what's really going on here. Or no, excuse me. The sisters were trying to be the investigator, and I'm the one teaching them. And so I remember in that lesson, in that role playing, where I had those familiar feelings come up, and I'm like, okay, let me ask this question. Let me ask this question. Let me ask this question. And it got to the point where the sisters looked at each other and were like, wait, maybe that's it. Maybe the reason why he's not choosing to be baptized or he's starting to ghost us is because of his dad. And it turns out later on, it was because of his dad. And so I had that huge, I'm trying not to get prideful here, wonderful blessing of knowing that what the Lord did taught me that day, he really, really taught me to understand how he communicates. And so there was another another time where towards the end of my mission, probably about the 22nd mark around there, almost the last, second to last transfer, where we, as a zone, we went to the mission offices, and they were having this Joseph Smith, it's not a musical, but a music program, and they were singing, a lot of the amazing songs about Christ and everything. And anyway, so as they were singing and everything, we finally show up and we open up the back door, and then we just hear like this. A beautiful choir singing, and this, for me, it felt like a wave of the Spirit, like just hitting me very strongly. And I just turned to the rest of the elders, like, guys, are you feeling that? And like they had no idea what I was talking about. And that, I mean, granted, that was a little bit sad for me because I'm like, well, how did you not feel that Spirit? But at the same time, I know the feelings of the Spirit. So it solidified to me that and again, trying not to get prideful here, but I think I am going to get very, very prideful here. It was rewarding for me to know that I understood more on how the Spirit works versus my versus the other elders, versus the other missionaries. So I did still do to this day, pride myself in knowing and understanding when the Lord communicates with me. And so that was the worst part, is learning it and not feeling like I understood it. And then the best part is knowing and understanding how it all works. And so sorry that I had one answer for both questions, but
So I really agree with what you're saying in terms of, I think it's very regular to happen that the hardest thing and the best thing are the same. Obviously, it's not always the case, but I think that's life. We don't get trials in our life and without a purpose, and so those purposes usually end up being better. So the fact that that was your focus made it really hard, but it also made it really, really beneficial and rewarding after. So I love that. Okay, so we're gonna jump in to a little bit more of the maybe some fun things. I'd love to hear your favorite local cultural dish and what the food was like, what the adjustment to the food was like, or not adjustment to the food was like.
So very, very interesting, the Argentine cuisine, because I totally thought there was spicy foods. Turns out they hate spicy foods, and I was very disappointed in that, just because I grew up eating spicy dishes. So one of my favorite meals down in Argentina is their empanadas. And so it's just basically like this pastry-like dish with meat inside, and sometimes they put like other types of meat inside. And so it's just like about a very small fan-shaped dish. And so like they're really, really easy to eat. You just grab one and just start eating it. So it's just basically finger food. That one of my favorites for sure is the empanadas. Argentina is maybe still is. At that time, Argentina was known for their meats because it just mostly grass-fed cattle. And so when I went down there, I was actually quite excited to taste their meat and everything. And at that time frame, the cost of meat started to skyrocket. And so I didn't really have, there were maybe 2 or 3 times where I actually had some Argentine beef. Like in Argentina, it's called an asado. Here in the US, it'd be called more like a barbecue. And so I only had a very handful of times where we actually had a barbecue. Which is kind of unfortunate, but I get it. I understand it. And so that's having to taste their meat. It is different, and it is good. Well, what I can remember. So that's the food portion. Some of the funny things that has happened. Let's see. Well, the thing that I can definitely say is I've never pooped my pants. So that's something that I have pride myself in. I've had a couple of companions that have didn't make it, unfortunately. Let's see. I think I took the calling of a missionary a little bit too seriously. So when it comes to like joking around, unfortunately, I don't remember joking around as much.
Anything else that you wanted to cover?
A question that I always ask returning missionaries is, what did you learn from your mission? And something that my father-in-law, I look up to my father-in-law a lot. He's a very, very powerhouse individual. I really like the responses that he looks for. And I'm starting to echo that a lot more. If you didn't learn that Jesus is the Christ at the end of your mission, then you need to go relearn that. Because of the point, in my opinion, mind you, these are my opinions. When you're choosing to serve, you're choosing to serve the Lord. And with time, as you continue to serve, you will know that Jesus is the Christ. And so when I ask return missionaries whether or not what's one thing that they learned, I I don't appreciate some of the responses that are like, oh yeah, I learned how to teach the gospel, or I learned to love people. I mean, yes, they are great. They are noble learning lessons. But you really need to know as you are serving that Jesus is the Christ. It's your own conversion process. It's the time frame where you get to have that one-on-one time with the Lord, undistracted. And so that's one of the things that I like to ask returned missionaries is what they have learned. And so if it's not that Jesus is the Christ, if that's not your first answer, I will slap you upside the head. So those that are listening to this, just know and understand it really is your one-on-one time with the Lord. So far, according to my life, it's the only time where you get to receive revelation without getting distracted. And so take that seriously because it's going to help you later on. So something that, a question that I always ask returning missionaries is, what did you learn from your mission? And something that my father-in-law, I look up to my father-in-law a lot. He's a very, very powerhouse individual. I really like the responses that he looks for, and I'm starting to echo that a lot more. If you didn't learn that Jesus is the Christ at the end of your mission, then you need to go relearn that. Because of the point, in my opinion, mind you, these are my opinions. When you're choosing to serve the Lord. And with time, as you continue to serve, you will know that Jesus is the Christ. And so when I ask return missionaries whether or not what's the one thing that they learned, I don't appreciate some of the responses that are like, oh yeah, I learned how to teach the gospel, or I learned to love people. I mean, yes, they are great. They are noble learning lessons. But you really need to know as you are serving that Jesus is the Christ. It's your own conversion process. It's the time frame where you get to have that one-on-one time with the Lord, undistracted. And so that's one of the things that I like to ask returned missionaries is what they have learned. And so if it's not that Jesus is the Christ, if that's not your first answer, I will slap you upside the head. So those that are listening to this, just know and understand it really is your one-on-one time with the Lord. So far, according to my life, it's the only time where you get to receive revelation without getting distracted. And so take that seriously because it's going to help you later on.
Okay, so I absolutely love that, and honestly, if you asked me that when I got home from my mission, and even if you asked me now, I wouldn't answer Jesus Christ. Not because I shouldn't have, but because I actually don't feel like I focused on Jesus as much as I should. I feel like a lot of my focus was on the church. It was on the restoration. It was on working hard, being obedient. Like, it was on the Lord, but it wasn't Jesus Christ. I know, obviously they're the same person, but it was like on serving the Lord, but it wasn't the focus of Jesus Christ. And it's been a huge thing since in the last few years of my life is kind of recentering on Jesus rather than recentering on Joseph Smith or the church or the Book of Mormon. And all those things lead to Jesus, but they're all just tools to get to Jesus and the atonement and in utilizing that power in our life. And so I love that you talked about that because I had to learn that again after my mission. I did learn a million awesome lessons and it was a great experience for me, but I wish I would have focused more on Jesus, both in my own life on my mission, but in my teaching to help other people. I feel like I would have helped more people if I would have been more focused on Jesus rather than more focused on the gospel and how the church can help you. Yes, the church helps you and it helps you through Jesus. But if I just would have went through Jesus and the church is the pathway to Jesus, it would have been more effective. And so I love that you talk about that, because I think that is a huge thing. So, okay. So thank you so much, Juan, for jumping on. It's been awesome to have you on. I would love, the last thing I want to hear is just a little bit about what you're doing now in life, and kind of how some of our listeners that may be in the Cache Valley area can support you.
Yeah. So I work. It's funny how we kind of started crossing paths here. So I now work for the Cater Shop as their sales manager. So I've been here since May of 2023. Prior to that, I was over at Utah State. And I'm laughing a little bit because I've been doing interviews to have more sales staff on the floor. And one of the questions that I received, that I got asked from a candidate, is what keeps me here. I had so many people help me on my mission to get ready for my mission. I've been very, very blessed with an amazing, not only friends, but an amazing town that supported me in everything that I wanted to do. And I've seen so many miracles of people helping me get all my supplies, helping me to prepare to go serve. And now I'm in a position where I can bless other people so that they too can go on a mission and feel like they don't have to worry about anything. And I get to relive my missionary moments. I love my mission so much. I loved it. I loved every single minute. I've also hated some of the time frames, but the end result is that I get to relive those experiences, and I get to share what I've learned, and I get to teach future missionaries some of the lessons that I learned, and I hope that they don't have to repeat those lessons while they're out serving. So I'm fortunate in that I'm here, that I can teach and guide missionaries, future missionaries. It's honestly one of the best jobs I've ever had, and that is actually saying something for me. I don't normally say that very often, but what other job out there is out there that you get to relive your missionary days?
Yeah, and that's awesome. I feel so similar. A lot of people ask why. I've been here 9 years. You've only been here for 9 months. In that same range. And people ask me all the time, like, why do you stay? And a lot of it has to do with being able to help missionaries. I don't get it as much as I used to, being on Salesforce as much as I used to, but being able to help missionaries and get them excited for their mission is one of my passions. I absolutely love it. So for those of you that live in the Cache Valley or surrounding areas, if you've got a missionary going out, somebody that's going on a mission, let them know about Cater Shop. Cater Shop's an amazing place. They're actually part of our buying group, and there's some. I probably should go through and explain the whole situation one of these times. We're a little short on time today, but they are part of the Odeon group. So they're our partial owners in Odeon. So if you're in the Utah County, Salt Lake County areas, come visit us in Odeon. But if you're in the Cache Valley area, go hit up Cater Shop. They're awesome. So thank you very much for jumping on, Juan.
Yep, no problem.